Wait a second. That's not our theme song. That's an April Fool's joke, everybody. We're not the Ed Lambert Show. We're happy to be with you today. You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd, and it is April Fool's, so we thought we'd have a little fun with that. Our show is a financial show. We call it Something More because we like to talk about not only those important dollar and cents issues, but also those quality of life issues that make the money matters matter. Thanks for being with us. Lots to talk about today and having a little bit of fun. I'm joined by Jeff Perry throughout the show. Jeff, thanks for being with me again this week.
Good morning. Good afternoon, I should say. I knew that radio noise didn't sound right.
That's not right. But anyway, thought we'd have a little fun with that. And we've also got with us throughout this hour, we've got Brian Regan, our firm's Chief Investment Officer. Thanks for being with us, Brian.
Hi, guys. How you doing today?
Doing great. April Fools, I can't help but think of my sister, who's passed, but when her kids were growing up, she would love to play some kind of harmless prank on them for April Fools, and just like having fun with them. One of the ones that I remember most was she had them convinced that they were on the radio on the morning show of one of our sister stations, thinking they were like getting a prize, like they were the caller, I don't know. You guys have a favorite April Fool's, just something that's, either a funny thing that's happened to you or a little prank? Are you opposed to the pranks of April Fools?
I'm not opposed to the pranks, but I don't have any real memorable one. I've been married to my wife Lisa for 34 years, and she outlawed them early in our relationship. So
yeah, that was probably wise. I got in trouble one year. You know how on your sink where you have that little nozzle with that if you squeeze it sprays. Yeah, yep. I rubber banded that, and when she turned on the sink, that was.
How'd that go over?
Well, it was pretty funny, but she didn't appreciate it all that much. She laughed about it. She was mad, but she laughed about it. That was a long time ago. I don't do those kind of things anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Learned my lesson, right? But anyway,
how about you, Brian?
I love pranks personally. I've got some good ones, but I should probably share them off air.
What about like replacing the toothpaste with something, or what are some funny ones that you've heard of? Let's say anonymously, perhaps, Brian.
Well, anonymously, I know somebody who his wife really dislikes eggs, and this is pretty innocent, but he gets access to her phone and fairly regularly writes a egg-specific post, and it's pretty remarkable how many egg-specific posts he comes up with. It's usually about an omelet she enjoyed in the morning, or
something silly like
an
that.
Egg sandwich, or she has egg in her face for some reason. Pretty harmless, but it's always funny and
never gets old, huh? Yeah.
She always gets upset with them, and we all love it personally.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I hope everyone has a fun April Fool's. Take it in stride. Have good humor about it, and don't be like too harsh with those pranks.
Don't be cruel.
Yeah,
right?
no cruel pranks. Just lighthearted stuff. So anyway, all right. Well, let's turn into our conversation toward more productive discussion. Brian, why don't we start with something you had talked about? One of the things we've been trying to do throughout the show from time to time is talk about some of our case studies and life lessons, whether it's from working with our clients along the way. We see a lot of things that are common, kinds of issues and concerns. And anyway, we've been trying to incorporate occasionally little bit of these lessons for people that they can take away from it, some ideas or some benefits. But you had a topic that you thought would be worth talking about a little bit. Why don't we start with that?
Yeah, I think my question is specifically for you guys, the advisors, and I'm curious on what you would suggest for a 35-year-old married couple, so nearing middle age, with two young children, but still very much working age. How should they prioritize their savings? And what I mean by this is there's obviously a whole bunch of different ways that you can allocate your savings. You can there's couples maybe have 401ks at their jobs, maybe they have IRAs, maybe they have Roth IRAs, maybe they have a traditional savings account, maybe they have a traditional checking account. Still working, trying to save for retirement, save for their children's future, but also saving for their everyday lives. I'm just curious how you guys think that should be appropriately allocated.
It's a great question, and of course, the challenge of it is everyone's circumstances are different, and which is to say, their income, their expenses, their capacity for this it can be very different from one family to the next. Because you can have some people who are just barely getting by and trying to avoid racking up credit card debt because they don't have as significant an income stream. And then you can have people who have very appealing income. Of course, oftentimes even people who have very good income can end up outspending their abilities their lifestyle can take on too much expense.
But the purposes of this discussion, I think we need to assume that the people are saving, right?
Yeah,
The ask is how to allocate the savings.
I just think it's important to recognize. I wanted to set the stage that it's important to recognize that people have different capabilities, and that's understood. To your point, though, in a case where someone has disposable income, that is to say, the ability to do savings, I have some thoughts, but would you like to go first, Jeff, or would you like me to chime in?
Whatever you'd like. I obviously have some thoughts as well. So
I know this is kind of in your wheelhouse. Why don't I let you jump in, and then I'll chime in over and above maybe some additional thoughts after you have some.
Right. So Brian laid out the scenario that there's a couple. So the first thing I think is to make sure the couple's on the same page and has the same goals, and there's some good communication going on back and forth, which we're perhaps assuming here. And then we want to make sure that we have a budget so we know what dollars are coming in and what dollars are going out. So Brian also said assume that. First thing I want the couple to do is get an emergency fund established, meaning put aside 3 to 6 months of income, in a high yield savings account, something that's really readily accessible to them for when they need it, or hopefully they don't need it, but just to give some peace of mind and be ready for those unexpected life.
I would just alter that. Instead of 3 to 6 months of income, 3 to 6 months of expenses would be my mindset on that. You make sure you have enough for that kind of
that's
outflows.
Better said. And then before we got into investing priorities, I'd want the couple to look at their debt and see what their total debt is and make a plan for paying off that debt. Consumer debt first, meaning the high interest debt. Maybe they have some student loan debt. And then I want to start savings. And the first thing I'd suggest, Brian, is if you're working and you have an employer who's offering a match in a retirement plan, it's a gift. It's quote unquote free money if they're doing the match. I'd make that a priority. And the final thing I'll say, and turn it back to you, Chris, is in this scenario, if you've got those two young kids, college is coming quicker than we all think it's coming. So I'd be looking at getting a 529 account open for each one and getting their systematic savings, monthly investing into each one based upon what you think their expenses might be.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of the things that I would have thought as well. Paying down debt is certainly a priority. Oftentimes we have people talking about saving and investing, and when you look at what they're paying in absolute cost for debt that they're sort of gradually paying, you look at it and say, well, gee, this is something that should go first.
Right.
and so that's a really great point. And I totally agree. I think I would prioritize first any kind of match through the employer for the retirement plan as like number one. That's free money. Don't leave it on the table. I do think you have to start thinking too, when you do investing in savings, you need to think in terms of diversification of tax considerations, right? So if you have a plan that allows for a Roth option, I would entertain including some of that Roth treatment in your mix. That way you can have, one of the things we see oftentimes, people have done a great job saving, but when it comes to their retirement, it turns out most of their money is in tax deferred investments, and then they run the risk of, just everything. Every time they need money, it's coming out of a taxable bucket. So you hit on that as well, I think. But yeah, I think one, I'd look at first, do the financial plan. What's the goals? Well, what's going to take to get there, and we can look at the most efficient way to do it. But I think you hit on it. You'd maybe start with the retirement plan, so you do at least some, get that match, and then look to the college savings. There's different schools of thought on this as far as like how you prioritize these things. And if available, a Roth IRA can be used for college, in the sense you could withdraw a principal or something like that. So, the challenge comes when people say, well, who should I prioritize, saving for my kids' college or saving for our retirement? And I think there's a challenge in that. That's probably also goes back to your point about having conversation with the couple. Because how much are you trying to save for when it comes to college? In a typical example, one spouse may have gone to private schools and have had a considerable expense associated with college. And is it their family culture that they expect as the parent that they will cover all of that cost? Or no, the student has to pay how much of that cost? No, then the other person says, no, I went to a state school. That was fine. I got a great education. We don't need to spend that kind of money. You get that kind of potential for tension of what are we trying to save for? And so you got to clarify expectations of how much is our investment going to be in our child's education relative to our competing investment objectives.
Really important to have those conversations, and even if you're not on the same page right now, at least you're putting it out there, and this is something that in time,
a sense of, okay, this is something we have to navigate at least, right? Figure it out. Yeah, but and that can make a difference on how you think about allocation of resources in terms of how much, right, for college in this example with the two kids, but. I don't know, Scott. Brian, does that give you a sense of some things in this scenario? What do you think?
Well, I was taking some notes on what you guys said, and I think it's all great information. I think let's assume that there's a debt plan. Let's assume that there's an emergency fund. Two big things, or maybe three big things that jumped out at me is, let's try to put some numbers. Let's try to put some numbers around kind of this more loose conversation. Let's say somebody, this 35-year-old couple, has $100 a month to allocate after they've made their match in their 401k. Where should they put that money? How should they allocate that money between maybe an HSA account, maybe a 529, maybe a Roth? Maybe a joint account with the couple, so that they have some liquidity needs that they can still invest that, but it's more taxable money. But they can use it before they turn 65, before their children go to college. How would you guys take that $100? What do you think is the best use of that $100? And I obviously used $100 as a round number, so we can allocate percentages.
Well, Your point about taxable money is a good one. Again, I'm thinking of this as investment money, not deferred spending money. But if we're thinking about like, oh, we'd like to take a trip, for vacation in the fall, okay, that's deferred spending really, and so if you haven't got that included as part of your other savings, it's practical because you don't want to have it end up somewhere else on the, as a debt, or we're not trying to withdraw from, a place where it doesn't make sense, right? So I'm assuming that's already in the numbers, and we're talking more actual investment.
Yeah, that's a budget item. It should be allocated in the budget.
Well, I think you could certainly have a joint account that's invested that you're going to use between 35 and 65. You don't necessarily have it earmarked for anything.
Yeah.
But you would like the option. Maybe you want to buy a bigger house at some point in the future.
Buy a bigger house, maybe a second home, things like that.
Another car. It's just you need some liquidity that is not necessarily needed for today, not necessarily part of your emergency fund, but maybe a longer term aspirations kind of thing, where you're 30. This is a 35-year-old, not a 60-year-old. They're going to have some real opportunities to use this kind of taxable money rather than tying it up into retirement.
Well, in reality, if you're only dealing with $100, you're probably going to put it all into that taxable account then, because you're going to be needing money for buying a car and
Sure, let's say it's $1,000. I took that as just a way to allocate the money.
You follow my point though, like the scale of it does make a difference.
Scale does.
Yeah.
So Brian, when I was your age, if you will, I'm a little bit older than you, but when I was your age, we had all those things in mind, right? So we used something that we called buckets. Some people use them, call them sinking funds, a lot of different names, but basically a segregated place to save for our long-term goals. So in your scenario, if I had the goal of saving for college for kids, I'm already matching, I want to save for a bigger house, I want to save for some, maybe I want to buy a boat or something, I would just, with my wife, have that conversation about what percentage of our money, excess money that we have each month, we'd like to dedicate to these goals. Say it's $1,000, and say we're going to put half of our excess money into 529s, 25% of that $1,000 in each child's 529. We're going to put 25% towards a sinking fund for a larger house, and it depends on the time frame on that. If it's more than 5 years, I might just put it in an S&P 500 fund, so it has some potential for growth, but it's diversified in a single account. And if I'm going to save, say, for a big vacation, maybe in 2 or 3 years across Europe, I'm going to put that in that 25%, if that's our goals, into a high-yield savings account. So there's not much volatility with that, and we can count on the money being there when we want to go on that trip. Something like that, depending on your goals. Sinking funds, buckets, whatever you want to call them, work for us.
I think it's it's worth pointing out though that things like an HSA, the 529, and the Roth, those are all tax advantaged vehicles in one form or another. So money that goes into an HSA, it grows tax-free, and if it's spent on healthcare costs, there's no tax event. Money that goes into a 529 plan, it grows tax-deferred. If it's used for college, it's no tax on the way out. It's tax-free in that scenario. Roth IRA, you've paid the tax on the way in, already on the way in, or Roth 401k, whatever it is. And whatever it grows into is free from tax. There is access to the Roth IRA. Keep in mind, there are limitations, but after, I think it's 5 years, you can pull out principal as needed, even before retirement. So I would let the Roth IRA be an important vehicle beyond, what you're doing in the taxable realm. Because you can pull some of that money out for various occasions, and that's not necessarily desirable, but it is accessible, and I think there's some benefit to that. So with that, we need to take a break. Let's come back, and we can wrap this up and talk about other stuff too. Stay with us. Welcome back to Something More with Chris Boyd. Here with Jeff Perry and Brian Regan, both of Asset Management Resources. We're talking a little bit about, nitty gritty. If you're really talking about savings, how do you prioritize? You got all these different possible ways of doing it, and there's no, singular one size fits all. But some good question, Brian, that you were raising in the last segment. I don't know. I just wanted to give you the last word if you had anything you wanted to chime in on before we move on to other topics.
Well, I think it was a great conversation, guys. I think you gave a lot of food for thought. I'm a little closer. My wife and I are a little closer to this actual scenario, so I just would like to share generally how I've navigated this kind of question.
Awesome.
I think couple on the same page as Jeff, was right to point out to is the number one thing. I think that's, as long as there's great communication about finances, without that, you can't accomplish any of this stuff. Sometimes there's a more dominant person that takes more control of it in the household, and that's fine. Whatever works for you, but just make sure that there is an understanding that that person is managing it and has an understanding of what's going on. I think the emergency fund is obviously a great idea. I think it's easier to deal with the volatility of markets, for example, if you have a comfortable emergency fund. I think a comfortable emergency fund is different for everybody, right? So you guys said 6 to 9 months of expenses. If you have like a government-oriented job, you might need a smaller emergency fund, right? If you are in an industry where you get laid off every 2 years, well, maybe you want a little bit of a bigger buffer.
The debt ceiling thing's coming up, Brian. That government job might not be as stable as you think. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you work for Social Security, it might be more stable.
Than
if you work for the Parks Department or something like that. But I think whether or not your job is stable. If you have a union job, et cetera, et cetera.
You're just trying to trigger them on the debt ceiling. I know what you're doing, Mr. Boyd.
I think debt, is a really interesting one, right? I think we all grew up and are well trained to be very careful not to take on too much debt, especially credit card debt. I think all that is well taken. But over the last few years, there's been a lot of opportunities to take 0% financing. So in the way I kind of view these things is, if I'm paying down debt where I have a 0% interest rate, I'm kind of paying myself. It's in a way savings.
Free money.
Right?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yep.
Cars depreciate in value, but every time I make my car payment, I'm getting that much closer to owning my car outright, for example. Same thing with my furniture forever. It might exist well beyond, in my household, well beyond that. So in a way that could be considered savings. Certainly if you own a house, if you pay principal down, that is definitely a form of forced savings. It grows over time. So, I would just say that not all debt's terrible. You can learn to use it responsibly. When it comes to 529 accounts, I completely agree. At least do the match. When it comes to the Roth, one of the things that I wish I knew when I was younger, and paid, zero in tax because I didn't make any money, was that's the time when you should be contributing to your Roth. It'll grow over time, and you'll have very, very minimal tax consequence. So if there's a younger listener or a parent or grandparent listening to this, teach these people to save in the Roth first, and it'll avoid a lot of the things that Chris has talked about. Utilize an HSA, especially if you're having a child.
That's a good point.
This particular couple already has 2 kids, but if you are planning on having a child in the next year or so, you are going to have a deductible likely on your health insurance, and this could very much come in handy as a tax priority. As far as college, I think people under fund their college 529 plans almost across the board. So I think, I've been having a lot of conversations with people lately about what the state of the future is going to be and whether their kids will be in a better position in the future than they are today. My position is that it's very likely that they're going to be in a better position in the future than we are in today. But the best way, in my opinion, to prepare them for that is to save for their education. And it's not necessarily for college. It can be for trade schools too. It can be for grad school. I think it's would be really hard to try to regret this decision. This money grows tax-free, so even if you do end up paying a tax on the penalty tax at the end, at least you got tax-free growth for a significant amount of years. I do think, we deal mostly with retirees, so the gut reaction is, save for retirement, save for retirement, save for retirement. I think this investment liquidity bucket is very important. You will grow into the needs of a bigger house. You will grow into the needs of a bigger car. You will grow into the needs of
These
new
are just
things
realities of
over the
a
20
growing
years
family.
that you raise children.
Yeah.
And there's no reason that you should pigeonhole yourself into, a savings account where you earn nothing on that money. Allocate a little bit to a taxable account. Nobody likes paying taxes, but we're talking about a capital gains rate, first of all, and a dividends rate that is lower than ordinary income rates most of the time. So it's true that you will pay taxes on capital gains if you need that money, but at least you can access the money. And that can be very important. It can be part of your emergency fund too at a certain age, as long as you're still working. And I hesitate to say that a little bit because I think that works for a lot of people, but not necessarily for everybody. But if you have a significant drawdown on the stock market, let's say we had 30% drawdown in the NASDAQ in 2022, and you have $100,000 in the NASDAQ, you still have access to $70,000 under an emergency if you burn through your emergency fund, and that's not nothing. And if you have that kind of savings in there, you could probably, in theory, take a little bit of risk. So, thank you guys for answering that. I thought it was a great discussion.
Great question. That was good.
Hopefully it's a little out of the box from what we typically talk about, and I think it could be helpful to some listeners.
Well, I think you raised some great points, and I do agree with your point that there is a virtue in having a taxable account that you can access, for occasions that may still be long-term, investable timing, but not immediate, and not necessarily at retirement. So that's a good point. And just one last thought, we talked about this in other shows, but recent Secure Act 2.0 did come up with some changes. So even in the case with the 529 plan, that you don't end up needing it all for college education, which again, what are the odds of that? But but if
maybe they get a scholarship or
maybe something like that.
They don't go to college.
Right.
Someone join the military or enter a vocational profession.
So all that being said, Jeff, you've talked about this, that there's a place for an alternative approach to this that can help the student in another way that they could benefit from.
Right. I actually wrote an article on it, and people can read it if they'd like. It's on our website, amrfinancial.com. It gives the opportunity for those unused 529 funds to be transferred to a Roth IRA for the beneficiary up to $35,000. There's some rules and restrictions on it, but it's a good option if there's some money left over or unused money and you don't have an additional beneficiary. There's more options than there used to be. So check out that article on our website. Great
idea. Additionally, we're going to talk about this in our next segment a little bit. But spring clean your finance. We've got a really terrific guide for people that if you have an interest in taking advantage of this, it's a freebie. Just you got find it on the website and give us your email address, and we got this 10-page review of some real good tips about spring cleaning your finances. We think of this time of year to do some spring cleaning in our house, but there's other things that you want to think about as well. And so if you're interested, go check it out on amrfinancial.com and get that benefit. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that at some point during the show today as well in our next segment or not. I want to talk about, before we do that, I want to talk about the passing of Gordon Moore, and Moore's Law, and that generation of creators of technology. So let's come back and talk about that in just a moment. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm Chris Boyd. I'm here with Jeff Perry and Brian Regan. We are all affiliated with Asset Management Resources. That is our firm. I'm coming to you from the Asset Management Resources studios, and Jeff is in Florida. Brian's in Boston. We're all over the place these days, huh? We got a little bit of distance between us, but in any case, thanks for being with us. And as we mentioned before the break, I had seen an article just mentioning that Gordon Moore died at 94 years old. And it's just started me thinking about Gordon Moore was one of the co-founders of Intel. And you've probably heard of the his Moore's Law. And I don't know how many people know it as Moore's Law, but this idea that the amount of capacity that a microchip can hold is expected to double roughly every 2 years, while the cost of creating that might half in that same time. So that it's this massive enhancement over time that has created this larger and larger capacity. So we walk around with a phone in our hand that has more computing power than early computers.
Yeah, the IBM supercomputers, right?
Yeah,
when we were kids, these computers that took rooms to fill.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it, right?
It really is. And so he created this concept, the law, if you will. And he was right. I mean, we've seen it. It's lived out. It's still producing. It's still becoming more and more true every year that goes by. They're doing more and more.
I just thought it was kind of maybe an opportunity to kind of pay tribute to when you think about this generation of, from in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, where they've created things that have turned into this evolved into this way that's changed the way we live. And we're on the verge of talking more about artificial intelligence, and
they could not have imagined some of the things that are happening, from microchips in your refrigerator and toaster.
To the
AI phenomenon it's upon us, to self-driving cars. The list is endless, right?
Yeah, and so whether it's Steve Jobs and the ones we know, Microsoft and all the rest, but there's all these people that we don't know that were, as like household names, but had a huge part in playing in the evolution of the technological advancements we take for granted today. So, in any case, Brian, you want to comment on any of this?
I just think it's remarkable how accurate he was.
Yeah.
He posited this in 1975, and it's really taken on. It was just a kind of a theory, maybe a hopeful thing back then, and it's become reality. Whether it's a self-fulfilling prophecy or not, it does seem like, these chip companies come out with a chip that's half the size every 2 years. That's almost the R&D goal, right? So based on Moore's Law. I know the CEO of NVIDIA thinks that Moore's Law is too conservative, which is pretty remarkable, right? Because he posited basically a 41% compound annual growth rate, which is remarkable exponential growth.
How do they do it? Just the science of it's got to be really interesting, but just the concept behind this.
Well, the little that I know about it is it's not easy. These foundries that get built to build microchips cost some $20 billion, which is why we had the CHIPS Act last year. For example,
right.
To try to onshore some of these things to build some capital projects to do it. Our biggest position is in the individual discretionary stock portfolio is in a company that makes the equipment that makes semiconductors. There's not many companies that can do it and do it effectively and at scale, and that can have a research budget that can come out with the next thing that can advance Moore's Law. It's it's in practice for us as much as it is, in theory.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. And, you just don't know how this does evolve, but, it's just so many facets of life. Jeff, you were talking about some of these kinds of, whether it's AI is the latest thing.
Right.
Last year, you couldn't avoid talking about cryptocurrency and blockchain technologies and all that involves, and just as you were saying, like even household equipment, appliances and they're all connected now. You got smart houses and all this other stuff that, I mean, it's just amazing. It's
changing the world, sure. And if you think about our military and industry, everything is relying on these chips and the progress of these chips. And to Brian's point, to get Congress together to
agree on anything, to
do anything, right, shows how important these chips are, not only to our manufacturing and commercial supply chain, but for our military advantages that we have. We have to have these technologies in-house in the United States in the event that things change in the world order, that we can't buy them overseas. So it is amazing, and it's we haven't even seen where this is going. It's every couple of years something else comes to us that we haven't even imagined. So the future continues for Moore's law, if not multiplied, as Brian indicated.
Brian, you had when I said where we're going to talk about this topic, you mentioned something about a jelly donut. What were you just busting my chain, or because I like jelly donuts, or well, I'm full of my chain?
The jelly donut theory is completely unrelated to Moore's law, so I'm sorry if I confused you, and it might be better for a different segment if you want to move on, or I can get into it and just completely change topics.
It was more related to the first.
We're going to change topics anyway, so go for it. What is this?
Okay, this might be the worst transition in the history of radio, so I apologize for confusing everybody. So I learned about the jelly donut theory from David Einhorn. I don't know if he created it or not, but I've heard similar theories from David Kelly over the years. So it's out there in the economic research universe. David Kelly is the senior economist at JP Morgan.
Yes.
David Einhorn is a hedge fund manager at Greenlight Capital. So the jelly donut theory is the idea that if you eat one jelly donut, it's very satisfying. If you eat two, it's less satisfying. And if you eat 12, you're probably going to get sick. So there's diminishing returns, basically. And the idea is posited for monetary policy. So mostly loosening monetary policy. So as you start to loosen monetary policy, the idea is it's very helpful. It tastes very good, but it tastes less and less good as you go down. And the idea is, if you have a 5% interest rate and interest rates go to 3%, well, it becomes more economical to build that factory. Take out that mortgage for that house, all that Main Street activity that we're all familiar with. But when you get close to 0%, or 1% or 0%, the difference between, a 3.5% mortgage and a 3% mortgage might not entice somebody to actually make that purchasing decision or build that factory. The idea is if they're not willing to do it at interest rates that are that low, it might just not be a good idea. And at the same time, there's something like I might be misremembering this number, something like $17 trillion in interest-bearing assets that Americans hold that are interest rate sensitive. So, and the vast majority of the liabilities that Americans have is fixed rate, because most of it is mortgages. It's 90% fixed rate. So the idea is once you get beyond the point where it's stimulative, you're actually hurting the economy. You're actually slowing it down, because people who would be receiving interest are not receiving interest, and the new lower interest rate isn't spurring on any more economic activity. I don't know if I ascribe to this theory. I think I need to think about it some more. I think I need to do a little bit more research on it. But I think it's important right
It does
now.
it does make sense to some extent, though, to just the way you describe it, and it's a great analogy.
Chris, how was your jelly donut?
I was just showing on screen for
Our
you guys that
listeners
I'm actually
radio.
enjoying a jelly donut
Yes.
as we speak, but
Don't have 12 of them.
but only one. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty
I
good.
think it's an interesting theory. So the what David Einhorn went on to say is that the increase in interest rates that we've seen initially may have actually been stimulative to the economy because we were actually hurting the economy with interest rates as low as they were.
That's really interesting.
This is obviously, you know, I have a view on the economy, right? And I have a view on investments, but I really make a hard effort not to be dogmatic about it. I try to hear other opinions, and sometimes you hear a theory or an opinion that makes some sense that might go in sharp contrast or even a little bit of contrast to what you're thinking. And you might want to implement that into your asset allocation or your thinking. And I think that's a very, you know, you just kind of learn to be humble. Very few people are always right all the time. I would say nobody is. So
Right.
A theory like that, which is, you know, very contra to, I think, the consensus understanding of raising interest rates is it should be tightening. You know, this theory would say, at least initially, the raising of interest rates is actually stimulative. Could have some big implications for the stock market, the bond market, and, you know, overall asset allocations.
Well, it does. There is an element of it when you think the economy continues to be pretty strong, and we've raised interest rates dramatically. There's got to be an element of, on some level, that's encouraging to, you know, people observing that the economy's still got some strength. You know, that kind of mindset.
Well, I think that makes some logical points, right? There are particularly retirees that can take less risk now and get more return from, you know, short-term interest rates like CDs and money market funds and, you know, just generally short-term investments, maybe commercial paper, maybe funds that invest typically in commercial paper. While at the same time, you know, I do. It's pretty clear that existing home sales have slowed down, right? So you could see that slowing of the economy there. You know, the high CPI led to higher Social Security payments, but now CPI has kind of dramatically fallen. So that real payment is much better now than it was when the change actually happened.
Yeah.
Real wages are picking up from a low. So there are some, you know, signs that the economy is not only still strong, but maybe even getting stronger,
Benefiting,
which would be, you know, supportive to this theory, I guess.
Yeah, very interesting. To your point about housing, just to inform our listeners, in the next hour, we're going to be spending some time talking about housing topics. We've invited two guests to join us. We're going to be joined by Annie Hart-Cool, who's a realtor who is quite knowledgeable about the Cape area real estate market. We'll also be joined by Savannah Fabio, mortgage professional, who will, you know, help us to talk about all that's been going on with the mortgage rate changes. And so we're going to spend some time focused on that in the next hour. We have, you know, just a few minutes remaining in this hour. So let me mention again, where it is springtime. Have you thought about spring cleaning, and have you thought about spring cleaning your finances? Jeff, have you seen this material that we've got available for our listeners?
I have, and I want to give some kudos to Kathy Ingersoll, marketing director, who put it together primarily. I know she had help, but it really looks good. It's on our website. You can sign up for it at amrfinancial.com. Go under the resources tab, and one of your choices is AMR Guides. And if you click that, you'll see the intro to it and how to register. Just need your email address and a little bit of information from you to get the free guide. And it's got a lot of great topics, from how to do some improvements or spring cleaning, as she puts it, on your bank accounts, your credit cards, your investment accounts,
insurances, other types of things. And it's got a little checklist as well that can really help you go through this for your own needs.
It's 10 pages, but it's a quick read, and I almost want to say I guarantee it, although we don't guarantee too much.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That I suspect that if you sign up and get your copy, you're going to find a couple of nuggets in there that is going to make your financial life a little more organized.
It's going to keep you busy for a little bit too. I mean, I know it's tax season and everyone's thinking along the lines of getting their taxes done, but there's some great, nuggets in here for you to just tackle different aspects of your planning and just review. What should you maybe prioritize? What are in different areas of your life and how to your financial life and how to think about this, whether it's bank accounts and how to think about where, how many, what to do, how to structure it, different priorities when it comes to banking related things, when it comes to credit cards, how to give some strategy around some of these things.
One of the I don't want to give too many away, but one of them we just did a video about. There's a new video that we just released on our social media site where we're talking about it's tax time, right?
Yeah.
And one of the topics that we covered in that video that people can see on our various social media sites is review your tax holdings. You just filed your taxes, and how'd you do? Did you owe a lot? Did you give the government a tax-free loan? It's a good time to check on that and make sure you have your withholdings correct.
Yeah, don't withhold too much. Don't withhold too little. Get a little Goldilocks thing going there.
Yeah, a little adjustment goes a long way.
Yeah, and similarly, when it comes to your investments, there's times when you can be more tax deliberate. You can really strategize a little bit about the way you structure your portfolio and things that can have an impact on your tax planning, just by looking, intentionally at the way you might design things. So, lots of ways to get some help in that. And again, if you need any help in the process, we're here at Asset Management Resources. We're always happy to be a resource for you. It's part of our name. Resources. We're that's what we intend to be. So if you need a little help, reach out. You can connect with us through our website, amrfinancial.com, and as was mentioned, that's where you can find this spring clean your finances. But you can also request a meeting, and additionally, you could if you'd rather just give us a call, you can reach out to us at 866-771-8901. I don't know about you guys these days, but if I can avoid doing a phone call and do a text, I'd rather do that. So that's another option. You could always just send us a text and we'll send you out some materials and schedule a meeting. 508-915-3700. See, it's that April Fool's thing again. So, No, not really.
The joke's going to be on somebody else.
I just made a mistake, that's all. But in any case, well, thanks, guys, for this hour. Brian, thanks for your contributions, some good topics for discussion. We're going to take a break for the news, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the real estate market and finances relating to that. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd, Financial Talk Show.
Asset Management Resources, LLC, and J. Christopher Boyd, CFP, provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is in the nature of general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. AMR, LLC cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.